this great idea now.
I had many great ideas.
And so you decided to write almanacs. Where'd that come from?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the reality is that if you are a writer, you can only write the ideas that really fruit. And they will come along. And you can either take them at that moment or not. And if you do get an idea like vampires versus werewolves, by all means, do it. You should not hesitate. A better time will not come along to do it. But I failed in that case. And then you might have to wait many, many years before another idea, however weird or strange or implausible or uncommercial or as ridiculous as it may seem, for example, fake almanac, there is no sense to chase another idea until you find that idea that grips you, as did the idea of fake trivia with me.
So are we led to believe that you just couldn't get enough book to do a whole book on hobos?
Oh, yeah, there is only a portion in my first book on the subject of the hobos of the Great Depression and their cultures and their habits of wearing the same pants every day, and their strange languages and their brief tenure running the United States. I'm talking about the previous Great Depression, you understand. The older one. There are no hobos now.
John, what is the technical difference between a hobo and a wino?
Oh, well, that's very clear. So I wrote a lot about hobos in the first book, and I really was very specifically talking about this subculture of the 1930s, of men who had abandoned their families in certain cases and went around the country hopping boxcars looking for work, and eventually became a self-identified, separate culture with its own, sort of slang and its own code of ethics and its own language, literally. I mean, they had, the hobos had a symbology, kind of hieroglyphic code that they would scratch on doorposts and barns, leaving a message for the next hobo to come along down the road. So, for example, a cross on someone's house would mean to the next hobo, religious talk will get you a free meal here. and the picture of a stick figure of a woman with 3 triangles next to her would mean a woman lives here alone with her children. Creepy. Creepy and true. Although in certain regions it just meant the woman lives here who loves triangles. Some squiggly lines meant that the sheriff here is really mean. The law here is really mean. 3 stars would mean that the sheriff or cop in town is skilled in the art of the throwing star. And of course, an H with sun rays around it meant that it was time for the hobos to take over the United States government, which happened in 1933 briefly.
And the hobo that took over, tell me just a little bit about it.
Oh, well, hobos are by definition lovers of anarchy and individualists. It's not really clear why they thought it was a good idea to take over the United States government, given that they had no interest in running the country. So there never was a head of government per se, and they really only managed to take over the Secretary of the Treasury Department. Right. They took over that building, and there was very briefly a hobo Secretary of the Treasury named Hobo Joe Jumpman. To date, our only hobo Secretary of the Treasury. Well, that may change.
What's curious about that is that obviously mole men were much more ambitious because they apparently played this role.
Now you moved very quickly into mole men there.
Well,
I realized it took me years to pivot from hobos to mole men. Now you're asking me to years and 2 books. And now you're asking me to spin on a dime and go into the mole men who live beneath the earth. You ask too much. I'd like to answer your first question, if I may, and then your second question. Yeah. So when I wrote all this, I was really talking about a legitimate historical subculture that in reality and in my twisted imagination, did essentially vanish after the 1940s and 50s. I mean, the hobo subculture kind of dissipated after the war, and except in song and lore and legend, and this sort of romanticized idea of the hobo that lived on in like children's Halloween costumes, and, you know, like little cartoons and that sort of thing. But, you know, today there is no major, there's no continuity of hobo culture today, except there are some sort of neo-anarchist young kids who sort of emulate in a nostalgic way the hobo lifestyle by dropping out of society and riding trains. But, I mean, in reality, they're nothing but phobos. You know? But I became concerned very quickly because while I think of something very specific when I say hobo, there are lots of parts of the country and Canada where hobo is really synonymous with homeless person. And that's not what I sort of meant at all. And I realized, oh gosh, how cruel I must have seemed to be doing this whole, like, let's have a laugh at the homeless. This is how I type. Bong, bong, bing, bong, bong, words. Here's my check. And indeed, that's not what I meant to indicate at all in the book. And so when I came time to write the next book, I had to, for reasons that should be clear to anyone, write a large amount about the mole men. A completely different subculture that live beneath the earth. They are disgusting creatures who secrete a luminous slime in order to see their way through the dark and make their way through crevices. They spit acidic drool in order to carve through rock and make their great cavernous underground cities. The capital of the mole men, of course, is Pennsylvania. And they wear powdered wigs because they're mole men of reason. They are ironically creatures of the Enlightenment, who befriended Thomas Jefferson and really convinced him to become a revolutionary, and they also introduced him to the $2 bill. That was their giving. And I thought for sure, writing about the mole men, no one now will accuse me of being anti-poverty or whatever, until I was reminded that in New York City, in the subways, there are communities of homeless people who are commonly known as mole people. And it's like, I cannot win. I cannot win. I know. But so far, no actual or imagined mole man has come to pull me down into the depths.